What's good, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to SK Wealth Academy podcast number 123. Highly schooled, highly degreed, and impeccable academic pedigree does not mean highly educated. Now, highly schooled is not the same as highly educated, although the vast majority of society makes that mistake. And nope, well-read does not mean well-educated either, because you could have a ton of knowledge about facts, but misinterpret that knowledge. So just because you're well-read does not mean well-educated, which kind of goes along with the same theme. Highly schooled is not highly educated. Now, in regard to the current viral epidemic, you could claim, hey, I read Laurie Garrett's book, The Coming Plague. I know about virology, and then start throwing out these nonsense arguments that you hear people make all the time, whether it's in regard to finance, medicine, astronomy, any other subject. Then they start to try to catch something you don't know. Oh, do you know what R naught is? If you don't know, then you know nothing about virology. So they try to just because they know memorized information, they want to pass themselves off as a pundit, which is ridiculous. So when I observe people that clearly are married to ideology, that don't listen to science, that don't listen to facts, that don't listen to critical thinking and analysis, I'm tempted to say to those people, hey, I graduated from an Ivy League school and I have 2 master's degrees. What's your academic background if you think you know more than me? Because 99 times out of 100, that completely hollow argument with zero merit that proves nothing about my intellect or educational level, but to those with critical thinking skills, causes them to shrink and shrivel up, and they don't know how to refute that hollow point, and then they concede the argument to me. I'm just like tempted to do this just out of humor. So where loyalty, because a lot of people today are loyal to ideology, not to truth, and not to even the process of discovering the truth. They just believe one thing and then they will not veer from that belief, no matter how much evidence you bring to them that contradicts their belief. Now, loyalty to your wife, your husband, your family members, your friends is admirable. Loyalty to ideas is not. Loyalty should only be to truth and morality. Now, the interesting thing is, I remember seeing an interview with I think his first name's Novak. I don't know. His last name is Djokovic, right? The famous tennis player that's won all these titles like Wimbledon, the French Open, and is just a dominant tennis player, right? Professionally ranked #1 in the world for a long time. I don't know if he still is in 2020, but for a long time, like nobody could defeat him. And he is a Serbian, right? So that's always like one topic I wanted to learn more about, the war in Yugoslavia, right? Because we always hear that Milosevic, who was a Serbian leader, was a complete monster, committed a lot of war crimes. And from what I've read, I'm certain that he has committed a lot of horrific acts. However, I can't conclude, because my knowledge is not deep enough, that he's the complete monster the media has portrayed him to be. Only because when I've researched some of these so-called monsters in the past, it's not like these monsters are like Hitler-like monsters, although some people say Milosevic was. Like, I don't know, because I haven't researched enough. But some of these monsters that have been described as monsters in the past, when I researched them, I found that their depiction as a monster was purely for political reasons. And sure, they weren't saints, they weren't angels, they did some horrible things, but their horrible acts, behaviors were actually no less than the very leaders accusing them of being monsters. In other words, it was just for a political narrative that they were painted as monsters, and they weren't great people, like I said, but they weren't any worse than the people painting them as monsters as far as things that they had done, which nobody should be proud of. So, and the like Slovenians, Croatians, Albanians, and Kosovo, Bosniaks, Macedonians, like Yugoslavia got split up into 6 different countries afterwards, and there's the fog of war. So I've read some stuff, but I'm still, until I deeply research that and a horrible way of researching anything is going to Wikipedia. So that's not going to tell you the truth in 9 times out of 10. But, most people do not understand what really happened in Yugoslavia. So if just to understand how deep, that's why the term fog of war exists, right? Because there's so much propaganda that people internalize as truth because they listen to mainstream media and they don't really dig deep down to understand the truth of these historical wars. So I would urge everyone, as a point of being able to separate the wheat from the chaff as far as truth and fiction, to go investigate that war, because most people I've talked to don't really understand that. They know that the Serbians were at the throats of the Croatians, most of the Bosnians were Serbians, and that I've heard of horrific things like fathers abandoning their wives and their children because he was Bosnian and his wife was Croatian, just like terrible, repugnant behavior because of this ethnic hatred between all these different ethnicities, right? So there's, anytime that happens, there's going to be so much propaganda from all sides. So this is a great place to start. So what made me think of that? Okay, let me get back to Jukovic, because Jukovic is a Bosnian. And one thing I found that he said that was very admirable is he said that he was most proud of keeping an open mind, because he said as a child, he's like, I didn't understand why bombs were being dropped upon my city. And he mentioned once the apartment building he lived in did not have a bomb shelter. So he would go to one of his relatives' home. And they said for like 15 days in a row, they stayed at their relative's home because they had a bomb shelter at the bottom of their building. And one time they left their apartment building and just saw planes flying over. And what do they call it? Like strafing? I think when they're just unloading heavy munitions into their apartment building. So he said he was traumatized by that, and he said he didn't understand why as a child anyone would do this, right? But yet he said, I kept an open mind about this, and he's like, I don't hate anyone. And so that's what made me think, hey, probably studying that war in Yugoslavia is a great way to open up your mind, because by researching that, there's no doubt you're going to come across a lot of propaganda, and you're going to have to work through that. So it's a great process for your critical thinking skills. Now, I draw this back again to the viral pandemic, because I posted 2 charts, and again, I saw people married to ideology. One person immediately responded, even though I posted a link in which I said there's a detailed explanation of these charts and the link. And obviously, when you're married to ideology, you're not concerned with learning the truth. So you're not going to go to the link to read anything I had to say, which is the sign of an idiot who's going to respond without reading the narrative I wrote explaining the charts I posted. So one was a chart of the mortality rates of the virus in the United States versus Sweden, right? Because I was saying how Sweden's no lockdown policy was a complete success, although it's being painted as an abject failure in by the Western media. And this person is like, and the other chart I posted, which I'll get to in a minute, because I saw people immediately, I completely ignored. There's only 2 pictures I posted, 2 charts. They immediately ignored the chart that basically discredited their entire ideology, and they just focused on one. Say, why would you ever compare Sweden's success rate to the United States? Because the United States has among the worst mortality rates of the virus in the entire world. And had they read my narrative, excuse me, they would have understood and saw the reason I did that is to expose the hypocrisy of the US media, who was saying it was an abject failure. So, excuse me, I have something in my throat. The mortality rates in America for the under 40 age group in the United States were more than 1,200 times worse than Sweden. So it's like, if Sweden was an abject failure, then what was the United States? An apocalypse? So, and then on top of that, I pointed out that most of the deaths in Sweden happen amongst the elderly population. So they said, oh, so you think that old people, that their lives are not important. Of course, again, they're just pulling arguments out of their butt that have no logic and no credence when it comes to intellect. Because had they read my narrative, like I said, okay, Sweden didn't do that great a job with the elderly population, but the whole point was because the mortality rate was so low, not in just the under 40, but the under 60 and under population, or anyone under 60, because I think it went up to age 59. So 59 and below, that was proof that segmented strategy should have been the case. So, they should have been more strict with the vulnerable population, and then they were correct in being very lenient with those under 60. So they could have protected their elderly more, but but they didn't bother to read that. So of course, they just are going to make points that make no sense, that fall in line with their ideology. But secondly, the second chart actually showed and then I even made the point, because the people say, why would you compare it to the United States? I said, yeah, United States, probably the numbers of deaths are biased, because we all know that a lot of states in the United States reported deaths attributable to the virus that had nothing to do with the virus. So I even said that. There's probably, the ratios probably look a lot worse as far as the mortality rates, but I was like, that's not my fault. So I explained the methodology, right? I said the US methodology for death data regarding that virus was highly inaccurate. But I said, that's not my fault. I pointed that out and said, that's not my fault. They're not producing accurate information. I can only compare what the various public health agency of Sweden produces in their data versus the health agency data that the United States produces. But as I said, you can't just believe statistics and data blindly, and I even made a point of that. But of course, none of them read the narratives. And then secondly, they completely ignored, even though Sweden had much higher mortality rates amongst the elderly population, guess what? I compared the mortality rates from the virus to the more historical mortality rates of the flu in America. And even in the elderly, it was less. So it was less in every category. So my whole point, which I thought like I didn't have to make, because the charts will show that if you're not locking down the United States every single year in response to the flu, where mortality rates even amongst the elderly is higher than the mortality rates of the elderly in Sweden from this, the COVID-19 84 virus, then why would you mandate lockdowns now? So they missed the total point because they were unwilling to look at any data that disputed their ideology. So to easily prove to you that the mass media lies to us all the time in a scenario in which people are basically like the geese that have that tube jammed down their throat to fatten their livers to prepare them for slaughter and foie gras. The media are the torturers in that analogy that jam a tube of news distribution or news feeds into our throats to feed us lies that the vast majority of us seem unable to escape, even though we can easily pull that forced news stream out of our, well, actually it's not even forced. Geese is forced. They don't have a choice because they can't pull that tube out. We have a choice. And of disconnecting ourselves from that tube, all we have to do is cease to watch like CNN, BBC, MSNBC, read the New York Times, the Washington Post, cease reading the UK Financial Times, cease reading all the mainstream or mass media outlets that just have been proven to produce a bunch of garbage. So do you recall when we didn't have this pandemic to deal with? And global warming was all over the news, right? That was dominating the news. And they were promoting, the 0.1 percenters were promoting Greta Thunberg as their poster child to conjure up maximum fear that the world was going to end soon. And when the pandemic came along, I'm not joking, I bet you a lot of you missed this. They tried to turn Greta Thunberg from a climate change expert into a virology expert. They put her on a panel about the virus in a town hall that featured her, Greta Thunberg, along with all these other doctors and scientists that were like from the US Department of Health and Human Services, from doctors that were part of the Centers for Disease Control. And so it's just ridiculous and it's laughable. And of course, because their attempt to make her a virology expert with zero background and expertise in virology, that failed miserably, thank God. But I can't recall like Greta Thunberg saying, hey, the world's going to end by 2025 if we don't solve global warming. But we have a history. Remember Al Gore when he promoted his movie, The Inconvenient Truth? Look at all his predictions that never came true. We don't talk about that, right? Because he said the polar ice cap would be completely melted by 2014. Didn't happen. He said that Mount Kilimanjaro by 2016 would be totally snow-free. Didn't happen. Of course, we see the effects of global warming because we see glaciers shrinking. Like I've been to a glacier, I think it was the Mendenhall Glacier, whatever glacier is in Anchorage. I think it's Mendenhall, and I saw like pictures of where the glacier extended before, and then when I visited. So I've seen it for myself, and I believe there are patterns of global warming. But the big question is it through the carbon-based activity of mankind? Because meaning mostly factories and pollutants by petrol-run cars and automobiles. Because one thing, as I mentioned in a previous podcast, they never talk about is the chopping down of rainforests. But now, in a previous podcast, I said the loss of rainforests is 5 million hectares per year, but that's been updated. It's actually 8 million hectares per year. And what is one of the biggest consumers of carbon dioxide on planet Earth? Our rainforest, full of large trees and other plants, because they store massive amounts of carbon and consume massive amounts of carbon dioxide. And not only that, when they're cleared and chopped down at the rate of 8 million hectares per year, I think I might say per month, but I meant it is per year, right? That much of the burning of the rainforest releases carbon into the atmosphere and other greenhouse gases like nitrous oxide, methane, and other nitrogen oxides. But since the 0.1% are responsible for the destruction of the rainforest, they don't want to talk about. Like, when did you ever hear Greta Thunberg talk about the destruction of the rainforest, perhaps contributing to the fluctuations in the global temperature? Never, right? So it's clear she had a political agenda, was propped up by some think tank with a clear political agenda. And even, Al Gore's whole thing in The Inconvenient Truth with all these places around the world going to be underwater. Well, there's two ways that can happen, right? Because I don't know if he said it, but I know he's defended people that have called him out as being completely wrong. And I think one thing is that he said is that we're seeing more flooding. Well, you know how flooding can happen. Either the sea levels are rising or the land is sinking. Because Indonesia and Jakarta has been one of the nation islands that are island nations that has always been in the news as far as now being flooded regularly. But guess what? It's not really due to global warming and rising sea levels. It's because the land is sinking, because Jakarta was built on landfill and not designed to support the population density because it's exploded in population density, and that's what's causing it to sink, and that's why it's below sea level right now. So again, a lot of times that when data statistics are used, if you look to what the real reasons are, then you can completely discount and discredit what people are saying. So that's all I want people to think about in this very, very brief podcast today, is that no, you're not educated just because you have a fancy and decorated academic pedigree, and just because you're well read doesn't mean you know what you're talking about. So I would encourage everyone to divorce your ideology, have an open mind, like Novak Djokovic. He said, despite all the horrors he saw during war in Yugoslavia, because then it was called Yugoslavia, that he still keeps an open mind, doesn't hold hatred for other ethnicities that were bombing his hometown at the time. That's what we need to be like. We need to keep an open mind so we can uncover the truth in the end. Okay, thanks so much for watching. Please do comment below. Thanks so much to all my patrons. I always have to give thanks to my patrons in every podcast. And if I forget, then that's all me. I should always remember, because without you guys, without my patrons, these podcasts would never come to light. And if you're interested in becoming a patron and learning about the benefits, which includes a whole heck of a lot of investment advice, a lot of Patreon only articles, 2 bonus Patreon podcasts per month that are about 40 minutes to an hour long in length. And you can go, there's other for top tier supporters, but most people join at the $5 or $10 level, but there's more benefits at higher tiers. But just for the cup of a Starbucks coffee, right, $5 a month, you can have access to everything I just named as far as those benefits. Just go to patreon.com/skwealthacademy. Thanks so much for watching. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe, because a lot of times I notice that people find my channel by typing in SK Wealth Academy podcast, looking in the search channel. That's like, instead of having to do that, if you subscribe, hit the notification bell, you'll get a notification every time I upload a new podcast. So you'll know. So you don't have to go type in SK Wealth Academy podcast into YouTube every time you look. Okay, thanks so much for watching, and always remain intensely curious. So long.